We are back with XR at Work. Scott and Dane, you know us. But hey, Dane, everybody might not know our guest today, and we really want everyone to get a chance to meet him. So tell us who we're talking with today, Dane.
Yeah, so today we have the honor of talking with Professor Bob Stone. He's been in the XR space for a long time, and I mean that in the best way. Lots of wisdom in this space, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the discussion today. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
That's a real pleasure. Looking forward to it, I think.
Well, so as I said, you have a lot of experience in this space. And in fact, one of the things that I like following you on LinkedIn for is some of the the papers obviously that you share, but also the history lessons. And I saw a post you made. I think it was the Sword of Damocles that you posted about not too long ago. So I wanted to see, obviously that was a ways back, but I wanted to kind of talk to you about the history of XR. Like, what's the first interaction with an XR technology, that you had?
That I had. Well, my first experience came in 1987, I say, but nearly 36 years ago. And we were doing some work for research into low Earth orbit teleoperation for the European Space Agency. And I managed to get myself over to Maryland to one of the NASA site over there, where I bumped into this incredible guy called Dr. Steve Ellis. And Steve was working as a human expert. He was over at NASA just south of San Francisco, and he convinced me to pop over, because at that time I hadn't realized that popping over to San Francisco from Maryland was just as long as it takes you to cross the Atlantic.
Right.
But I got over there, and because normally these things take weeks and weeks and weeks to get security clearance to get into places, even certainly for a Brit. But he put me in the back of his car and told me to shut my mouth, and we got through NASA security, and he took me to see his lab with Scott Fisher, another great name in VR XR. And long story short, one of the demos they showed me was involved putting on this really bulky converted scuba diver mask, which had a couple of pocket TVs that they bought from Radio Shack, a pair of lenses from another great guy called Howlett from Leap Optics, and a Polhemus tracking system, which was being used by the military for things like tracking aircraft targets, and this really bulky glove that had fiber optics in. And they put me in front of this escalator, this graphical escalator, and it was wireframe. Mm-hmm. And my God, that changed my entire life, because my vestibular mechanism was telling me I was still on the ground. My visual system was telling me I was going up, and I was walking along the ledge and coming back down again. And I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. This has got to be the way in which simulation, particularly for training, is going to evolve in the future. So I came away from that completely changed man.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, as things progress, right, technology obviously gets better. Things aren't wireframe anymore, all of that stuff. Like, what's exciting to you right now about, the space that we're in, given that you've seen so much of the history, transcend over the last, 30 plus years?
Yes, the last 36 years have been a roller coaster ride. I recall, back in 1990. In fact, I brought it down specially from the room upstairs.
Oh,
inventing the world's first tactile feedback glove, which is Teletac. There is the actual glove itself, which I framed in the hope that my family can sell it on eBay when I pass away, maybe. But things, it's interesting in haptics. And you've probably seen this on LinkedIn. Haptics hasn't really matured a great deal.
Oh, Dane loves haptics. He's right there with you. Dane loves haptics. Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay. I'm sorry for you.
No. I love haptics, but I agree with you. It's not where I want it to be. So I'm interested in your perspective there.
Yeah, I mean, when it's, as we found with Teletact, and Teletact is okay. It's old, very old. But we actually pulled that together in 1990. But it's the same issue, and which is convinced me when we first tried it out. I mean, that thing was pneumatically controlled. So what it was doing, it was inflating little like micro bladders, air pockets onto the fingers, and then there was a Teletact 2, which had a large Palmer air pocket, if you like, which was made from fire, the fire service hose, and it's great. It's great fun. It will give you as it was important in the 90s. It did give you that additional cue to having touched something, or should I say more accurately, collided with something. Which is why we then took it and put it onto a hand controller, little mini pockets, because that was much more effective. What it didn't do, and what it still doesn't do today, is it doesn't give you that sense that you've picked something up that may have contents that are moving around, no matter what. And I'm not going to mention products, but we know who they are. You cannot put on a wearable that's brimming with, and I don't care whether it's pneumatics, hydraulics, piezoelectrics, mechanically restricting items that stop your hands from moving, even these crazy mid-air haptics systems, which are just beyond belief in my head, having tried them. You cannot simulate what it takes to pick something up, move it around, feel the texture, work against gravity. It's just not there. And we learned that very, very early on. So I'm not a great fan of haptics, which is why one of the things I am positive about is mixed reality, in the sense that our projects now in training involve pass-through cameras. And we were doing pass-through camera headsets, and we were doing this long before Vario came onto the scene, so that you use a pass-through camera headset, modified headset. In our case, it was the original was an HTC Vive Pro. And then you use that in the context of a blue screen enclosure. So in effect, chroma key, anything that's not, or anything that's blue, becomes the virtual context. In our case, that happened to be a Chinook helicopter or the rear cabin. Anything that's not blue, which includes the casualty mannequin, your hand, your body when you look down, your colleague, you can actually see for real. But then when you reach out with your real hand and you touch the real object, there's none of this nonsense of the hand disappearing into the virtual object. You see that all the time, particularly on medical and surgical demonstrations of virtual reality. You've got these crazy disembodied hands whizzing around, and they try. Sometimes the medical instrument will make contact with the hand, and then they'll start doing crazy things, like particularly the orthopedics guys who are just crazy. I mean, they're internationally crazy, and other surgeons will call them crazy. But then you see them tapping away at bones and thinking, how on earth are they doing that? And and they're modifying their behavior all the time. And how does that transfer into the real surgery? Good. Anyway, so mixed reality is important for me for the near-term future, because you're interacting with objects that are of crucial importance to training with your real limbs.
So
the other area, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. So I have a question pertaining to that. So in some of our training scenarios, one of the kind of hypothesis, or the thesis that we have is that if you can drive a go-kart, you can probably drive a car, right? So how do we make it to where it's not so much that we have to replicate the experience perfectly, but it's that we can replicate it good enough that you can learn skill sets that are applicable. Do you think that's the right way to think about that in cases where you don't have tons of money, or the very expensive hardware to make it work? What's your thought on that?
Well, certainly since some of the early projects, I mean, yes, I would agree with that. Although the way we tackle these things is that we spend a lot of time with the end users right from day one, and then regularly throughout the design cycle. So we call it human-centered design. And I see very few examples of that online, which is really, really a shame, because people seem to take for granted the comments and the PR online that put on this headset and all your interface problems will go away. So, and I think the content design is much more important than the actual technology, and also attentions to what humans can and cannot do. One of the guys that I refer to quite a lot in this is he's a human factors guy or user-centered design guy called Donald Norman, and his book, The Design of Everyday Things, which is available for free on the line as a PDF download. I mean, he comes up with this fantastic block diagram which shows how you process information through the senses, how you then change those using your cognition, your experience, etc., into motor activities. If you put a barrier between you and the real world, or you and the virtual world, it doesn't matter. Then all of a sudden you have these, he calls them gulfs of evaluation, because what you're seeing, what you're sensing, what you're smelling has been modified by the wearable you've been given. And then gulfs of execution, what you're trying to do on that same environment has been modified by the things like haptic feedback. So you get this vicious circle. So what you've just been saying is absolutely right. But let's put the human first, understand their limitations, their capabilities, their attitudes, and then gradually move on to developing concepts that those same people can evaluate.
I've felt for years, Bob, like a lot of in particular, the virtual reality software that I've seen, I look at it and I feel like it's been designed and built by someone who's a computer programmer sitting in an office, probably never, A, been into the environment that this training is related to, and B, probably never talked to an end user with relation to what you're saying, what it's like, what's going to delight and actually impact the user. I think you're onto something there. It's there becomes a big gap, and it makes sense to. And I'm a developer by trade, so I know this pitfall we can have where we fall into thinking that our own applications are brilliant when we're not the intended user, right? What a huge gap that is, especially in virtual reality.
Oh yeah. And it's something we fell foul of, and I fell foul of in the 1990s when we were looking into virtual reality for training future keyhole surgeons, and we got this big. Well, it was kind of big, not big by American standards, but big by UK small group standards. We got this grant from the health service to look into how this thing called VR might affect surgeons in the future, and yeah, we went off and we bought the Silicon Graphics supercomputer for what, $350,000. We went off and we developed our own haptic feedback system for surgery. We went off and we commissioned an autostereoscopic glassless display camera thing, and we just technology. And the surgeons turned around and they almost cancelled the contract. They said, we can't afford this. Yeah. You know, we can't use this. If you pull that human tissue for real, you're going to kill the patient. And then, but I mean, fortunately, then I kind of slapped myself about a bit, and then went back into the operating theatre, watched what these guys were doing, and then the resultant training that came out was actually the de facto standard for keyhole surgery training for 10 years.
Wow!
And that's just because the human factors, the human-centered design, we finally got it right. But it was a close-run thing.
Yeah, we often talk about, when we're thinking about technology, it's more about the process, right? In operations, you got to think through your process. But I think even in manufacturing, we don't go the next step, which is it's about the people that run the process, that use the technology, right? And so I'm interested, from your perspective, like a human factors perspective, what are the benefits of XR technologies? Like, what are the top ones that you see? And then what are the things that you feel like have to get better or are most bullish on, getting better in order to get to a place where it's closer to the kind of human experience that we're looking for?
Yeah, so it's difficult to put a ranking on any of the technology at the moment. Although, yeah, I'm a big fan. Well, I'm a big fan of a couple of things that are evolving. One of which is smell. I actually think in the same way that sound enhances the immersion of a VR experience, smell will do the same long before haptics. Long before haptics.
Wow.
And I think also the form factor of the XR headsets, particularly particularly those that are now integrating pass-through, that excites me quite a lot. But you're right; it's as I've said, it's all too easy to get excited about the technology. But if you don't put the human first and interact with the human right from day one, then you're really on a hiding to nothing. I mean, there are some really quite readable things out there. One of the documents that I always quote to people, it's an international standard, and this sounds a bit nerdy, but it's ISO 9241 Part 210, published second edition 2019. It's an international standard, but it's that thick, it's tiny, and in that international standard, it has this fantastic flowchart. And it looks into things like context of use. So how do you observe your users? How do you define who they're working with, what they're working with, in which context they're working with? And then how do you use that to formulate your system, evaluate it as a prototype, and keep on doing that until it's ready to become a product? And that standard really is, I think, alongside the Donald Norman book, and a publication that I did back in 2012. That really is. It's not a gold standard, but it's probably the only readable, implementable standard that's out there for XR.
So, Bob, let me ask you this. So, obviously, I'm not in England myself, and obviously, you're not in Atlanta, Georgia, right? So, we live in different parts of the world, which I think is something that makes this all just super rich and flavorful. That this is an international, technology and concept. But when you talk about standards, right? I mean, we've not asked anyone this, but I think you're better than anyone to give us your thought on it, Bob. Do you feel like we're ever going to get to where we're working between China, the U.S., Europe, the U.K., where we have some standards and they're adopted and we're all playing nicely or playing off the same sheet of music? Or do you feel like we've got a long way to go before we're all using the same kind of sets of guidelines and trying to play to the same tune?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. Bearing in mind that people are already talking about setting up XR standards, be it for health and safety, metaverse standards, and you see it all the time, particularly online. I'm skeptical, very skeptical. Unfortunately, even if people adopt some kind of simple process or procedure to bring the human-centered design in at early stages, that would be good. Mm-hmm. But because of the nature, and we've seen this in the military for simulation, looking at distributed simulation, DIS, HLA back in the 90s and 2000s. People try to force feed others with standards, mm-hmm. And the problem that I've found is that a lot of people just don't pay any attention to them. And B, when they do, and it becomes a major international standard, then you find all these little companies that seem to suddenly emerge, who are offering to do the standardization process for you. Mm-hmm. And I've certainly seen that in the military in the UK. Again, I won't mention any particular product names, but there was one stage where our Ministry of Defence mandated that verily thou shalt use this standard for your virtual reality training. Training procedures in the military, and some people did, and people like my team didn't. We tried, but we simply just couldn't get on with the software because it was a tied down commercial product as opposed to something like Unity or Unreal, which you in the right hands you can do something with, and you can do something damn good with. These products that were allegedly coming out of standards, mm-hmm. Tied everybody in, and to actually get into the guts of the software, you had to pay money to other people, mm-hmm. to help you innovate. So it's expensive. It was stifling innovation. Yeah, and that's the problem. I think that's the problem with standards. unless you use the standards at a very fundamental level, and there's nothing more fundamental than the Mark I eyeball and the human. If it's related to products, forget it. It causes all manner of problems.
You know, that's an interesting thing, you know, too. I think I agree with you. I think trying to standardize too early stifles, you know, innovation in a space. And the challenge that we have right now is the space moves too fast. I mean, it's like week to week, it's like I can't keep up with, you know, everything that's going on. And so how is anybody going to standardize on anything right now?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so my concern, I with that said, you know, it's always the tightrope that you walk, right? Like with that said, I don't want to live in a world without standards, because I don't want to have to build for every headset, you know, ever imaginable, and, you know, not have interoperability and all those things. So yeah, it's interesting. You know, it'll be interesting to see how that develops over time. If it's like the web, you know, where, you know, everything's on the market and it kind of fights it out, and eventually, you know, whoever the market leader, you know, is kind of wins as the standard, or, you know, how that'll, you know, how that'll happen over time.
I think when you look at technology, I don't care whether it's XR or the internet or AI or machine learning, machine vision, and all the other kind of things that we're being flooded with at the moment, there's one common factor in the middle of all of them, and it's us. And so whilst I completely agree with you, this area is moving so quickly, trying to come up with a standard for optics, for light fields, for headset cleaning, or it's just crazy, because you do it for a small batch, and then a month ahead, and you've got new headsets, new glasses for AR being announced on a regular basis. But the human still stays the same, and I think that's where we've been pushing our magic, if you can call it magic, over the last too many years.
Yeah, so I'm interested too. So we've been talking a lot about training, right? How do we upskill people or give them an experience that they couldn't have otherwise? What's interesting though is, you know, in this space, a lot of the talk is around like interaction in the metaverse, right? Is that something that you are kind of bullish on, you know, for the long term, people being able to interact and do things and, you know, all that stuff? Or do you think it's more of like a kind of a personal experience, you know, that people have, you know, interacting with pieces of equipment? It might be multiplayer, but it's like, you know, one or two people, not like, you know, go to New York Square and the metaverse kind of thing. What's your perspective on that?
Well, as you know from LinkedIn, I'm not a great fan of the metaverse. I mean, it's over marketed hype at the moment for something that, in all honesty, and you can talk about the fact that it occurs in parallel with the real world, and you talk about digital twins and all the. Anyway, I won't go there, but yes, I completely agree with you. Interaction in VR, where you're talking about multiple individuals trying to work together to establish the same goal, the same aim, absolutely. And that's something that was done in the 1990s. There were European projects that looked at, and okay, they're fairly primitive in terms that you were a bot, you had a bot avatar, and you were interacting with other avatars, which was led by a Swedish group called SICS. That's absolutely fine. I mean, I couldn't agree more, particularly for international consortia. But this business of resurrecting, God help us, resurrecting Second Life, and people flying around, you know, with no legs and disembodied hands and strange garments, who turn up at your lecture, which happened to me in Second Life, which was such a traumatic experience. I refused ever to get involved again, which is again part of my post metaverse traumatic syndrome, PMT. Yeah, I might trademark that. But yeah, interaction by multiple individuals for a common goal in VR, including including healthcare. And I think healthcare is being bandied around at the moment as being one of the major developments for the metaverse, and that concerns me, because it's one of those areas where XR still needs to mature considerably before we can reliably quote it as being something that I would allow my body to be exposed to. But no, I think if you're looking at things like, and it's interesting because we've been doing a lot of work with care homes and hospices recently, and things like getting old people to sit together on a beach, and get them to interact whilst in a virtual world, be that a beach or a forest or the coastline or some rural area, and getting them to talk to each other makes a lot of sense. Getting them into an environment where they're going to be approached by some brainless idiot who wants to be verbally and sexually abusive.
Sell them an NFT.
I don't get it. And as we've seen, it's happening. It's happening all too often, sadly.
So, Bob, I'm gonna ask you a tough one here, right? And certainly, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but you've called yourself XR's Loveable Curmudgeon. I don't know if someone gave you that title or if you took that title on yourself, but I mean, and it was certainly we've enjoyed watching you on LinkedIn and seeing some of your comments, and everyone doesn't always perhaps take it in the spirit of the lovable part of the curmudgeon. But I mean, I guess my question for you is, do you have thick skin? Can you take it when people give it back to you? Because I get a sense that you do rather enjoy some good-natured ribbing. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, I mean that's it's my. I think. Well, I would hope that most of my colleagues over here will say that I've got a good down-to-earth sense of humor. Yeah. But I've also got a cabinet upstairs with blood pressure tablets, and I think it's kind of like there are things that I see on LinkedIn that really get my blood boiling because they've been done before, and I get a lot of flack back from people who says, "Oh God, he's going on about the 90s again. Here we go." And I don't care. I actually believe that if and it's not just me. I mean, there are other people out there who were around back then. Yeah. But I just think that if people did learn the lessons or did just make a bit of effort to go and do some research on what happened back then, we'd be a damn sight further forward than we are today. I really do. But yeah, I'm thick-skinned. I do get. I've had a few. I've had a few really quite vicious, not trolls. I've been called a troll myself, which is interesting. I don't see myself as a troll. But yeah, I've had some pretty wicked backfiring from various people, and it's. I mean, I'm actually a psychologist by training, you see, so I don't give a
damn.
Yeah, thank you. That could have gone wrong. I don't give a damn about what people think. I'm just thinking, well, I'm too old for this now. But for God's sake, guys, if you want this community to move forward faster than it is at the moment, stop reinventing the wheel. Look back and learn from those old curmudgeons. And again, that word that we used earlier on, but we won't use it here. And engage. It's incredible the amount of overhyped nonsense that you see on LinkedIn. It's not just LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is a particular offender. And the amount of stuff where I stand there and I sit there and I just start to seethe, and particularly with those individuals, and they know who they are. Well, they might know who they are. Some of them are so thick-skinned they probably don't. Particularly those individuals right there who do this, but blatantly have not been at the sharp end of XR in their lives, and they get cult followings. Thinking, what's all that about then? Mm-hmm. So being a lovable curmudgeon doesn't necessarily get you a cult following, but I don't care.
Well, Bob, I think one of the reasons that we were so excited to talk with you is because you're a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. Because folks like us, are people see the Microsoft, whatever their newest release, and they see Meta's, commercials that they put out, and they see all these different things, and then they come to us and say, "Hey, I want that." Right. And then it's our job to manage the expectations because, they've been so far blown out of proportion. And so I really appreciate voices like yours on LinkedIn because like I think Scott said this before, like you say things that we don't have the words to say, or like we don't have the background to say, and so
sometimes we don't have the guts to say. Yeah,
yeah.
Just call it like it is, Dane. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, so fair enough. But I mean, I just wanted to call that out because I think it's really important what you're doing, and we really appreciate you for that. So
Yeah.
I hope you keep doing it, and it's really enjoyable to follow.
That makes me smile. I mean, I do get a lot of direct mailing on LinkedIn saying, "Please never give up. We like what you do," and they by far outnumber the go away and die type.
Oh, God.
What are you talking about? Oh God, he's going on about the 90s again. So I don't. Yeah, I don't get a lot of fun out of it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not that kind of sadistic about publishing and thinking every day I get up. Well, my wife says she's taken now to basically saying, "Have you upset anyone on LinkedIn yet?" This is her first question before I get my cup of D bucks, because she's called D. She does wonderful coffee. Have you upset anyone on LinkedIn yet? No, not every day.
That's funny.
Well, we believe there's certainly a lot of wisdom to be gained and knowledge to be gained from someone like yourself, Professor Stone. At XR at Work, we really strive to try and provide some advice or experience and support and encouragement to those that are new to the industry, maybe trying to build their first pilot, sort through some of that hype, like Dane says, their bosses ask them to go do something, to go put, Iron Man Jarvis into, a who knows what, a warehouse. When you think about these new people in the business, I mean, what would be your advice to those just starting off? What could our listeners take from your experience if they're just starting off?
Yeah, excellent question. And I get this with students too, who are they well, I used to before I took too early retirement. I think the one thing that you need to make yourself stand out from the crowd, and my goodness, there is a hell of a crowd out there at the moment. I mean, the number of startups that are getting absolutely ludicrous funding and then end up not understanding what the word cash flow means and find themselves spending all their money on international exhibitions and finding out they've got nothing to pay themselves with. But I think the one thing that we've done and still do actually, because we're a tiny team, is get out, engage with an industry, engage with a commercial partner. And this sounds crazy, but it has worked in the past. Do a small concept demonstrator for them for free. And you can box clever here because you can do that concept demonstrator by doing something like, let's say, give you an example. My son at the moment is helping me do something for an aviation heritage center, and there's no money, and he's helping me. So go and spend a few $100s, download some decent quality assets from the likes of TurboSquid, CG Trader, or whatever.
Sure.
Put that into Unity. Add some little tags that are relevant to the company that you're dealing with, and get it back to them and say, "Look, I've spoke to you. I've had this idea. I've spoken to your employees. I've spoken to the people who might use this. What do you think?" And then, basically, as we found with most of our projects, and it has been accepted, it has been successful. 7 times out of 10, they'll bite. They'll bite, and they'll give you a small budget to take things further. But you've got to make that first step. It's no good you coming onto the market with this new glitzy, fantastic piece of technology, and then attracting all this money from gullible, dare I say, gullible and over-rich investors. I think, and I say this to students too, you have to build up a portfolio. Absolutely crucial. Now, whether or not this portfolio is in collaboration with a company or some other outfit, or whether it's something you've done, like maybe model, and this is relevant to us as well, model little bits of local heritage. Don't go in blind. Don't go in with nothing to offer. Go in with a portfolio across maybe a couple of 2 or 3 sectors and present that. And then say, "Look, I'm willing to do something for you for free. And then, again, as I say, if you box clever, there are lots and lots of assets, not just the 3D assets, which I mean, I've got thousands and thousands and thousands of 3D assets, but places like Unity Asset Store, absolutely brilliant, and it's out there. It's out there for the taking. But that portfolio mentality is absolutely crucial.
You know, I think that's interesting, and you know, I was trying to think, you know, from a industrial perspective, like if you know somebody's getting started fresh, you know, trying to implement it in their space, I think that advice applies too, which is just get on Unity, get some cheap, you know, assets, or you know, figure out some way to get a quick kind of demo of what you're thinking, and then show it to somebody. Right, like none of this stuff costs a ton of money. Like, you know, and you know, yeah, Unity takes some time to learn, and you know, there's skill sets that you have to learn to do it. But I think, you know, what I'm taking from that too is just start at the smallest incremental step and actually show somebody, because that's another piece of this that's difficult. Is it's hard to show somebody a video of VR and actually get across the experience, you know, that you have when you're actually wearing the headset.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times you just have to get people into a device, into a, you know, experience one time in order to kind of bridge that gap to, wow, this is, you know, what we could do, you know, with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because another thing that makes me smile on LinkedIn are all the people who are moaning about the cost of headsets, and I'm thinking to myself, my God, you know, if you're back in the 1990s, we were paying £6,500 for a headset, another £3,500 for a tracking system, and you're moaning at the HTC Vive Flow or the Quest 2 or one of, you know, or the Pico. You shouldn't be moaning at this. But I think you're right. You need to get people into virtual. They've got to experience what it's like, and you can do that if you're fortunate enough to have something like a 360 camera. Then you do that without having to go to the expense of developing bespoke CGI. But if you are using CGI and 3D models, then there's nothing better than putting people into the headset so they can experience just the fluidity of moving and the fluidity of interaction, and that is important. So yes, it is going to cost you a few $100s, but not that much. And as you say, I mean, Unity, my students, my masters, and well, in fact, I'll give you one example very briefly. And it's a young lady who came to me in June of one year, no 3D experience in terms of modeling, and she's never touched Maya. She hasn't touched also 3ds Max and what have you. No experience of real-time rendering. Come October, she produced this mountain scene, and it attracted the voiceover of Sir David Attenborough.
Oh,
and we've been using it ever since in care homes and hospices.
yeah.
So,
Wow.
so the YouTube, the online tutorials for things like Unity are superb.
Yeah.
And all you need to have is a little bit of imagination and some creativity, and off you go.
Well, Bob, we really appreciate your time today, and we what a wealth of knowledge you have, and we appreciate you sharing that with us and our audience. It's a real blessing. So thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm delighted to, you know, if you want me to come back and talk about specific areas, like for example, virtual heritage or healthcare, or the kind of things that my tiny team and I are involved in. I'm more than happy to come back.
We'd love to.
A couple of fellow enthusiasts.
We'd love to. Bob, thank you. We appreciate it. Great show today, and we wish you a good weekend, sir.
Thank you, and you guys.
Thanks.